Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project with E.C. Synkowski. My name is Patrick Cummings, and every episode I have the distinct privilege of presenting E.C. with a question on subject matters that range from nutrition to fitness to the choices we can all make to live a healthier, more functional life. By exploring both the principles at play and the actions worth carrying out as a result, we aim to get you thinking, get you moving, and get you taking more consistent steps toward optimizing your well-being. Thank you as always for tuning in. And how you doing today, EC?
I'm great. How are you?
Fantastic. Today we are going to talk about a term, a thing that I'd never heard of until you said we were going to do an episode on it. So something called reverse dieting. So I'm excited to get into you about that. You actually just posted something on Instagram about it too. So we're going to talk about what reverse dieting is. But first, we want to make sure folks know about a new round of your masterclass coming out soon. Tell people about it.
Yeah, so I've been doing the masterclass in cohorts, so people move together as a group. I am changing that slightly such that it will be available whenever if people want to go through it on their own. But I'm incentivizing it for people to go through it with me because they'll have interaction and the ability to ask questions in real time and kind of move through. And so there'll be a big discount to go through it with me. In fact, $100 off. And so the next round is going to be starting Sunday, April 4th. That is Easter, but the good news is we don't actually make changes until that Monday in our diet. So if you celebrate Easter, you still have that day off, and we'll finish by Memorial Day. So get that nutrition dialed in before summer.
I don't know what the positive version of a double whammy is, but it's that. Not only is it less expensive, but also you're probably going to be more successful because you're going to be having at least a little bit of accountability with you going alongside everybody, right?
Yeah, and not to cut you off there, but that's exactly the whole point of it is I really don't want this to be the course that people buy and never go through. And I want to incentivize people actually doing the thing. So that's the whole premise.
Whatever the positive version of a double whammy is, that's what that is. Okay. All right, my friend, reverse dieting. Let's get some background on what this is. I don't know if this is a common thing. This, again, like I said, this is the first time I'd heard of it when you sent me that this is what we're going to talk about. So maybe we just do a background in case more folks are like me in the sense of they don't actually know what even that means.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I've gotten the question a lot, just what about reverse dieting, right? The what about questions. And generally it's coming from this idea that women in particular, although it could be anybody, are, quote, always under eating, end quote. And they actually need to eat more, let's say, to lose weight. And so people want to know, is this really an approach for them in terms of weight loss? And I do think there is some application for reverse dieting, but unfortunately the chances that that is you is very low. It's very low, and we're going to explain why.
Okay. So first logical question, which is what is reverse dieting? What does it contain, or what does it entail? What does it look like when somebody decides that this is what they're going to do?
Yeah, we can't really talk about reverse dieting without first talking about metabolic adaptation. And we actually talked about metabolic adaptation in the Why Diets Fail podcast, but I try to keep things a little bit more to the practical side of things without necessarily always getting in the weeds of the physiology. So I didn't really call it metabolic adaptation, but I did really cover it. And it is the idea that your metabolism adapts. You know, metabolism is not just a static number for your life. When we say your metabolism or your metabolic rate, it's the number of calories you need to create that energy for all of the basic life processes and to go do your workout, right? And when we talk about, and this is just kind of an aside, but when we talk about like speeding up or slowing down your metabolism, this isn't inherently good or bad. It just means eating more or less calories, really. And that can be good or bad depending on the context. Now, as we explained in the Why Diets Fail podcast, when you lose weight by eating fewer calories, the body adapts to that lower caloric intake such that it becomes more efficient with every calorie. And we explain that, you know, that efficiency isn't really good in terms of weight loss because when you eat that apple, maybe it only gave you the energy to walk around the block once or twice, but when you become more efficient, maybe you get enough energy to walk around the block 5 times. So this efficiency ultimately means that you need less food for your daily needs. Now, to be very clear, and we said it again in that podcast, smaller bodies, all else being equal, need fewer calories. You have less tissue to support. So that's not going to change. So for you to keep the weight off, you will need to eat less. And that really has nothing to do with this metabolic adaptation. That just is. The question is, with this metabolic adaptation, is whether the person who diets down has it worse off than the person who never dieted due to this adaptation component. Meaning, in other words, did the person who dieted down force their metabolism to adapt in such a way that they get less food than what would be expected of someone who never dieted, but it's the same age, same height, sex, genetics and all of that stuff at that weight? Now, how much adaptation actually takes place is based on a bunch of different factors, of course, like how severe was your caloric deficit? How long were you on a caloric deficit? How much did your activity change? The wild card of your genetics and so on. And so there seems to be some consensus that yes, this adaptation occurs during the active process of weight loss. So while you're losing weight, yes, it seems to be that this is going on. The question is whether or not it persists and or how significant is that once the person is at their stable weight. We don't have a consensus there. There are some studies that suggest metabolic adaptation doesn't exist after the weight loss process over, or maybe it goes away after several months and kind of the hormones readjust. Or maybe it does persist, but the overall effect might be a difference of only 50 calories a day, which is pretty insignificant for all intents and purposes. And some of the problem here is there's some confounding factors with how we measure that and the accuracy of that and so on and so forth. But, that's really what metabolic adaptation is. And we're not really sure if it's kind of this permanent effect that's really affecting people in the long term.
Okay, so I repeat my question. What is reverse dieting? And of course, given all that, what does that have to do with reverse dieting?
Right. I just went on a little tangent and didn't answer your question. I guess we got to bring it back to the podcast, right? Yes, thank you. The idea with reverse dieting is why not force metabolism to go in the other way? Why not overfeed the system, so to speak, and force metabolism to need more calories and, quote, effectively speed up? Again, the body adapts, we've talked about that before, as much as possible to various inputs and stressors that we put on it. So can we adapt to eating more calories? And in fact, there have been these overfeeding studies where people don't always gain the expected amount of weight based on the number of calories they were overfed. Like if they were overfed 3,500 calories and they don't gain that pound, it's like, well, where are those extra calories going? Perhaps the body in its adaptation becomes more efficient and just burns them off. So the premise with reverse dieting is let's say that someone finishes their diet and finds that to maintain their new goal weight, they can do that at 1,800 calories. Can they reverse diet and get that maintenance number up to, 2,000 calories instead? And 200 calories might not sound like much, but of course, when you think through that, that's a glass of wine and maybe a square of chocolate. So across many days, having that extra 200 calories, extra whatever 100 calories it is, can potentially provide some flexibility. And it, of course, sounds very tempting. So the definitions vary about what reverse dieting is, but generally it's this process of gradually increasing your caloric intake to essentially answer the question, how much food can I eat at my desired weight? Now, implicit in that process, and I think people don't realize that, is the necessity of actually putting on some fat. Because to find the maximum amount of food that you can eat without gaining weight, we have to actually start gaining weight, right? We actually have to tip that tipping point to where we start gaining weight. So you gain some weight and then you diet back down to see if that new baseline allows you to maintain your desired body composition. And how much weight you gain will depend on what you're kind of comfortable with and your goals. And, for example, bodybuilders do this because they're willing to accept a lot of gain in the off season to improve, their muscle mass and their performance. And that might be more extreme than what I would say a lot of people are willing to do in terms of weight gain. Where
did reverse dieting come from? Do we have a sense of the source of it or where it started to kind of filter through into society?
Yeah, I don't know exactly where it came from. I know about it mostly through Lane Norton, who goes by BioLane on Instagram, and he probably does get a lot of the credit for making the term, I would call it mainstream. He will say very clearly the evidence is anecdotal and there aren't, these controlled trials about reverse dieting. But I've also seen plenty of other macro or health coaches recommending this approach with this idea of we're purposefully increasing calories in attempts to get someone to their target level of leanness eventually. Now, I don't know Lane personally. I do really like his content, but I do also want to point out that Lane is a competitive bodybuilder and coaches people to competitions, bodybuilding competitions, where he gets people stage ready. That's the first issue with it. Like reverse dieting, and sometimes they even call it recovery dieting in the bodybuilding space, is dealing with a population that's taking, themselves to the extreme levels of leanness that most of us realistically will never see in our lifetime. And they repeat that process multiple times over a career because stage-ready lean is just not sustainable. Their sport necessitates these fluctuations in and out of these body compositions that are flirting with essential levels of body fat. They want as much muscle mass as possible, almost zero fat, and see if they don't die. I mean, essentially, that's what happens when they're getting on stage, right? We're talking about very extremes.
That's the sport. That's whoever can get closest to dying wins.
It is. I mean,
without dying, of course.
And there's going to be hormonal effects from that, right? Like, there's women who can't get their cycle back for several months. Like, that level of adaptation that's going on there is incredibly different than somebody who I think is more relevant to most of my population, maybe losing, 20, 30 pounds and trying to get into the upper teens or low 20s of body fat, depending on if we're talking about men or women. So, when we look at this and I think about like, how much does this apply to people I'm working with? Like, let me tell you how many people I've worked with to get them stage ready lean. That's approaching 10% body fat for females, approaching 5% body fat for men. I've worked with zero, and I encourage zero people to get to that level of leanness. I mean, especially for a female, if your cycle is off and you're getting lean, like, what are you doing? Like, I don't advocate even flirting with those levels of leanness. So I think right there, it's like, okay, the bodybuilding community is going to do things for their sport that have zero relevance to me or my community. And even very fit CrossFitters that are, lean by CrossFit standards have more body fat than bodybuilders stepping on stage. So, there's a question of how much hormonal adaptation is happening when we stay within healthy ranges of body fat. And to some degree, weight loss will be favorable to hormones. Excess weight can be detrimental to hormones. So some of this is not just thinking about it as like weight loss is always negatively affecting hormones. But, it's interesting when you listen, especially when I've listened to Layne about, why he really found this to be an effective approach. He's talking about clients who he's trying to get them ready for competition. They're working out 2 or 3 hours a day, cardio. They're eating 1,000 calories and can't lose weight. And I'm like, okay, I've worked with zero women in that category, right? Like zero. So I'm not doubting that this problem exists or Layne's experience or any other coaches that are similar to Layne. I just think it's a very small percentage of the population. And I really don't think they're tuning into this podcast, to be perfectly honest.
I think that the question to me then becomes, what is it about this idea that people seem to be responding to? Because I imagine that folks will look at it and say, okay, I'm not a bodybuilder, but maybe that thing could still work for me. Do you have a sense of where or what in there is hooking people if it's not just attracting bodybuilders or folks who want to get into that sort of stage ready position?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think it's attractive or has gained traction for a few different reasons. And the first is that, as we just sort of said, that there's a population and there's merit for it. I think there's too much anecdotal evidence of people doing it to say that nothing's going on there. So I think there is some merit there. And so that's one reason why it's gained some traction and popularity. I think another reason is people are lured into the idea of eating more, right? Like, doesn't it sound great that, a woman who was eating 1,000 calories might now be able to eat 2,500 and still be relatively lean, maybe not stage ready lean, but relatively lean. So of course, eating more, people want to know more about this diet approach. But, third, I think we have to, again, remember the context of where it's coming out of. It's, these figure competitors who are having a hard time losing weight. And I think what happens is people hear that, oh, shoot, trouble losing weight part. And that's what they latch onto. And they forget that this is in relevance to a figure competitor meticulously weighing and measuring their chicken breast and steamed broccoli for the last 6 months, right? And in reality, I think most people just don't have a good handle on how much they're actually eating across a week or a month, or that they simply haven't stuck to the diet long enough. Because again, I've just worked with zero women eating 1,000 calories and doing 2 to 3 hours a day of cardio. In fact, I've worked probably with zero women doing 3 hours a day of cardio. Like, and that's not saying that we should be doing that. That's just a reality check of whether or not this is really relevant to us.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something we've talked about a lot. Where do you think, or what do you think? And you just kind of mentioned a little bit, but like, where is the issue, or what is the issue that folks have or tend to stumble with as it relates to losing weight, right? Where are people finding so much trouble that if they only could recognize that, maybe they wouldn't think reverse dieting is for them?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, there certainly are a lot of people who are frustrated with diets, and I get that. There's a lot of failed attempts. And so it's attractive to think that, my metabolism is the problem, my metabolism is damaged. But I think 9 times out of 10, when someone says that they're eating, 1,200 calories or some very low amount of calories and they're not losing weight, it's typically one of 3 issues. The first is they're often not reporting all the data. You might get a food log and you get the 5 days when they're being really extreme and doing the 3 shakes a day and the salad, right? But it's on day 6 when they face plant into a box of donuts, right? And they just don't share that data with you, right? Or they don't share that data with themselves. They don't actually log it. It's sort of similar for issue number 2. It's slightly different. It's a change in behavior. So perhaps the data on paper is in fact accurate, but they changed what they're eating because now they have to report it. So what they've been eating for the last 2 weeks isn't actually how they've been eating for the last 6 years. And again, that's because they don't really want to be honest about that process. It can be hard to kind of come face to face with, oh, okay, this is the reason why I'm not getting at my goals, right? There is also that kind of cultural shame around eating too much or binge eating. And so I think sometimes when people have to share that data with a coach or even, share it with themselves, for lack of a better word, that sometimes they change their behavior or don't log all of the things because it's hard to maybe face that reality. And, to be honest, if that data is truly accurate, if that's what you've been eating for months and it just seems like too low of an amount of calories and you're not losing weight, my actual next step would not be to reverse diet, especially if I'm not working with like kind of bodybuilder level of leanness. My step would be recommending that individual goes to an MD or DO doctor. There aren't really a ton of factors that we can play with in terms of losing weight from a nutrition perspective. So I want to know, what am I missing here? Get their thoughts on what's going on. I mean, hormones get blamed for a lot of things, but it certainly can be a contributing factor. But there could even be some psychosocial factors that could be better evaluated by a doctor, right? So if somebody's like, no, this is legit what I'm eating and I am not losing weight, I don't have many more options for them as a nutrition coach and I need the doctor to weigh in. But then the third issue would really be, and I think we've mentioned this before, we're just not really that good at recording food intake. Again, it's not necessarily that the person is trying to lie or even that they've tried to manipulate their behavior. It's just that we don't grow up doing it. The snacks are around us all the time. You forget about the cooking oil. You forget about the extra cookie at the office or whatever it is. So our modern life just isn't really conducive to the process. And so we're just not very good at it. And what's also difficult is with all of these kind of things going on is that you hear these anecdotes of people saying, I started with my macros coach and I'm just eating so much more and losing weight. And so that's kind of one of the issues here is kind of fighting those anecdotal stories as well. And I think basically what's happening here is that macro coach has spread the face plan of donuts across the days of the week. So the person ends up getting to eat closer to, let's say, 2,000 calories a day. And they feel like they're eating so much more than those, 1,200 calorie a days that they were trying to force themselves into. And they've taken that high caloric swing and kind of leveled it out across the days of the week. So they've kind of leveled out the highs and lows. And so yes, on average, people are eating more each day, but they're not actually effectively eating more overall. And ultimately, it's funny, we could track calories just by looking at a week balance or a month balance, because that's really what this shakes out to. It just becomes kind of a complicated system with the logistics of life. So we kind of look at it on this daily basis, but that's not how physiology works. It really works across kind of this long term, and we have to include, those weekend and caloric swings. And so I think sometimes, or most of the time in these situations, the coach has really just given the individual the permission not to be super restrictive, right? They've just sort of said that's not a normal amount to eat. Here's a normal amount to eat. And it's not that reverse dieting worked or that even eating more worked. What worked is that you're eating less, but you're doing it now in a sustainable manner.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's one of those things that, to your point, it's a lot easier, at least just logistically, it's a lot easier to track today than it is to track this week or this month or this quarter or the last 6 months, right? Whereas those things, the week, the month, the quarter, the year, that's actually you do need to see that in order to actually get a sense of what the heck's going on, right?
I love it. And I still think budget is one of the best analogies we can use for dieting.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter that today I ordered a lot on Amazon. Like, maybe I actually needed all of those supplies, right?
Yeah.
It matters. What does that look like across the month and the year in terms of where I am financially? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so given that I think a lot of our audience are CrossFitters, where, if any, or what, if any, application does reverse dieting have for the CrossFit community? You mentioned a little bit, like even really high level CrossFit Games athletes aren't at the degree that, or certainly aren't aiming for the same kind of goals that a bodybuilder are. But is there any useful applications here for this audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is. I think it's going to be a very small percentage of people. I would generally kind of put them in 3 buckets. The first might be somebody in that, regional level or whatever that level is right now, games level athlete. It would be is somebody who kind of meticulously is tracking their diet and training a ton. Like, do their number of calories make sense? Like, maybe they aren't even interested in weight loss, but it'd be really interesting if you had some sort of high level competitor. Let's just use Tia and Matt, but they're not doing this. This is just an example. If Tia was eating only 2,000 calories a day or Matt was only eating 2,500, I mean, just off the cuff, that's way, way too low. So if that was them, it would just sort of be like, hey, are we fueling enough? Like, let's make sure we're fueling maximally, right? The second would be a group of people, and they may be part of the CrossFit community, maybe not, but just anyone who's had kind of an extreme weight loss and they've done it with very over restrictive diets, like the 1,200 calories a day for 6-month Biggest Loser type approach, right? That show. Yep. And in that case, again, it's just a reality check of like, what are the calories you're eating and does this make sense for the context of the person you are? Like, a 55-year-old woman eating 1,700 calories is normal, within the range of normal. I wouldn't be like, oh shoot, we need to do reverse dieting or try something like that. Maybe a 30-year-old man working out 4 times a day, eating 1,700 calories and not losing weight. Okay, that's interesting, right? Like, what's going on? And that might be another scenario. And the third bucket might be where we have the most kind of people fit in here. It would be when somebody gets to their goal weight that they want to sustain. It doesn't have to be bodybuilding lean, it's just their sustainable weight. They could, if they want, to slowly and meticulously increase their calories to see kind of how many calories they can add and not gain too much weight. And we're talking a few grams of fat a week. Maybe we're talking 10 grams of carbs a week. And then over the weeks, maybe that accumulates to being able to squeeze some extra wiggle room in their diet without giving up too much body composition. I just think that's a level of precision and effort that a lot of people aren't interested in, particularly because it's already hard enough to have people stick to macros, right? So now we're assuming that they're at their goal weight, which can be a difficult and challenging process. And now they want to keep fine tuning around their goal weight, right? But again, I just also have to mention, inherent in that process is you are going to gain some weight because you want to find the maximum amount of food you can eat at the desired body composition. So to be clear, you've achieved your target weight, and now you're going to gain weight on purpose to go through the weight loss process again to maybe get a better outcome. So I think for bodybuilders who this is inherent to their sport and what they do, it's sort of a no-brainer. Like, sure, see what happens, right? They're trying to manipulate their physique in the best way possible. I think for
that's
people
what they're signing up for, right? That's
right, totally.
The game.
Exactly, that's the game. I think for people who love macros and just think this is like some fun self-experimentation, like, sure, go for it, right? A lot of people, I just don't think it's worth it. It requires a level of precision and attention to detail that might not actually do anything favorable for them.
Interesting. Okay, so if somebody was out there listening, they hear you, they're curious, how do they know if this is an appropriate thing for them to understand better and to try themselves? Is there a way, is there a question that they should ask? Is there something that you can give them to say, yes, no to reverse dieting? Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think those 3 categories are kind of the first step. Like, I wonder if this sounds like me. But I think then the next step is that we have to make sure that you've consistently dieted, right? Like you're weighing and measuring everything that you're eating. You're doing this for months. You've manipulated the calories in such a way, like assuming you want weight loss, you've cut down on the calories and you're seeing no results. But we have to be clear that like you didn't miss a day. You didn't not log the cheat meal. You didn't skip the days that you were on vacation. Like every bite, everything, every teaspoon of cooking oil, every condiment, like everything. And then if that's you, it's like, okay, maybe this is relevant to me. And just to get that plug in for that masterclass, right? Like it's not a 6-month long or multi-month long process, but certainly going to get a taste of that in the masterclass. And it's a great way to kind of assess your diet and see, where you fall relative to this idea. I think most people are going to find that it's a sort of consistency first, but that's part of the process that you can learn in the masterclass coming up.
Love it. And not a surprise that your response or your answer is consistency first, and then
we said it. We got the magic word in.
Yeah, we got it in there. And then, worry about the 1% after that, right?
Totally.
My friend, thank you so much. Thanks to everybody out there listening. If you like the show, please do leave a rating and a review. It helps other folks find us. And we'll see everybody on the next episode of The Consistency Project.